So, hello everyone. My name is Raf Rouco. I'm a musician based in Sydney, Australia. I guess I would describe my style as sort of rooted in the organic, real instruments style of music from the period between, say, 1966 and the mid-70s. That's the kind of music that I'm into. So when you hear our stuff, that's probably what you'll be reminded of.
Okay. What's your earliest musical influence?
So growing up in the early 70s as a kid who listened to AM radio a lot, one of my earliest musical memories is one evening I had a fever. In a state of delirium, I was using the radio to keep me company, and all of a sudden on the radio comes A Day in the Life by the Beatles. Now, of course, I was familiar with the Beatles at that age. It was a huge part of the cultural fabric at that time. But I've never heard that song, A Day in the Life, so it was something about that particular song that really transported me. There was, had a strange quality to it. I immediately recognised John Lennon's voice, but other than that, I'd never heard anything like it. So I realised there and then that there was a whole nother side to that kind of music, which I really wanted to sort of explore from that point. So I guess that's my earliest musical memory.
I still remember that song, and I read about it after I heard it, but it's still that song is completely different than anything else I've ever heard too.
Yeah, the best way I can describe it is it sort of taps directly into your subconscious. There's a quality to it. I mean, I almost remember feeling almost frightened to some degree. I mean, I must have been 8 or 9 years old, frightened and yet, you know, sort of transported by the beauty of it. It was quite unique, you know.
What is your most significant musical influence?
That's a hard one to answer. From that point, I mean, once I discovered that style of music, another one in that vein for me is Strawberry Fields. I think that's one of their greatest achievements also. But not long after that, I discovered a couple of cassettes by David Bowie, a couple of his earlier albums, in particular Hunky Dory and Ziggy Stardust, I think it was. And again, that sense of other worlds, the other, you know, which he was sort of really, you know, tapping into, that really moved me in a way I couldn't articulate at the time, you know. And through him, I sort of started to discover things like, you know, influences. I could tell that he was exploring things outside of the typical pop, you know, AM fare, you know. So I realized there was references to Nietzsche, for instance, other kind of philosophies that I then went and, you know, sort of started to explore. And you know, this is at a very young age. So, he was very influential, Bowie's early stuff.
What are some of your current musical influences? Okay,
so I'm always rediscovering the older music. For me, that's an endless well of fascination. So recently, I've been reading a book. There's a series of books called 33 1/3 where they analyse an album by an artist. Just recently, I picked up one on Sly Stone's There's a Riot Going On. And it just seemed, I mean, just as it happens, it just seemed to be tapping into everything that's going on at the moment, particularly where you guys are in the States. And just the way it was recorded, for instance, the way it was put together, completely unique. You know, I found it so fascinating, the process of it. It's alien to the way I work, but just so interesting how it was put together that it made me kind of rediscover it in a whole new light.
It's a great album. I need to, my psyche or my brain told me that I needed to find some of his music again. So
yeah,
I'm going to listen to his stuff.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, I was going to say his earliest stuff is so uplifting. You know, I Want to Take You Higher and Stan and all that stuff. It's fantastic, and it so fits that late 60s period of optimism. And yet, when you get to, I think that came out in 71, when you get to that moment, you know, things change. Yeah.
I know that not everybody, but a significant number of bands covered that song, including the Jackson 5.
Yeah, right.
Their first album or the second or the second album, but they did cover it.
Yeah, and again, it was completely in step with the times, and you can see why they were so popular. The performance of Woodstock, for instance. And I think he initially alienated a lot of people with that record. There's a riot, but it was so influential. I mean, even now you can hear its influence. The use of the beatbox, and I mean, it's got its fingerprints all over modern music, I think.
Yeah. What are your musical aspirations currently?
Well, I mean, I want to keep working on my songwriting. I mean, that's a never-ending sort of quest. I keep trying to get better. We was talking earlier, and you mentioned John Coltrane. I remember if it is in fact a quote by him, he said something about finding the perfect note. That idea of playing the note that is just right at that moment. That's such a hard thing to do, to sort of get to the essence of what you're trying to say musically. I was working on a song the other day, and it was a really simple melody, and I was trying all these different chord formations around it to see what worked best. So it's an endless journey, to try and to refine that skill, I suppose. We just finished recording a record, so.
Really? Writing works in very similar ways I just started taking drum lessons, so I'm not a musician, but I will get there. But I write, and writing, depending on how you pursue that process, for me it goes a similar way, because stuff will come to me, and when it does, I have to let it come through me, and if I don't write it down, I will lose it. Wherever I am, I keep a pad and paper, because it's easier for me to write by hand than to type it out. I'll type it out later, but it's easier for me to just, when it comes, to just get it down as quickly as possible.
Yeah, and I know, and that's sort of a discipline in itself, being in tune with that moment of inspiration. Like you say, having something to write with, so you don't, squander the moment. That's key. Yeah, I mean, it's same with me. If you have to go off and type it on a computer or on whatever, you can lose that tenuous connection quite easily, I find.
Some people grew up in the era where they had cell phones and computers, and so it's easier and more efficient for them to do it that way.
But I can see that. Yeah.
And if I'm in front of a computer, yes, I'm going to sit there and I'm going to type it out. But if I'm not, and I'm away, and it comes. A couple of years ago, I was working on my master's thesis, and I arrived early at work and finished, because I would go to work early and work on my thesis, and then I would clean up and go downstairs, down the escalator, and go into my department where I was working. And all of a sudden, one day, down the escalator, everything starts pouring.
Yeah.
And fortunately, nobody was in the department that I had to handle. And I said, "Everybody, leave me alone." And I grabbed as much paper as I could, and I just started scribbling really.
Yeah, that's right. It's almost a fugue state, isn't it, when you enter that moment of inspiration? And it always seems to be the most inopportune time, when you, like you say, you're stuck in an elevator or on your way to a meeting or something. And it's so easy to lose that connection that, if you don't really capitalize on it immediately, it can be gone. But it's a very rare, precious thing, inspiration, when it comes.
How does music affect you spiritually or psychologically?
Oh, wow. I mean, music, that's a tough one. It's everything. I mean, again, we mentioned Nietzsche. What was it he said? Without music, life would be a mistake. I can't put it much better than that. For me, it's the highest aspiration. Again, trying to get closer to the core of what it is. My understanding of it, which is all I can really aspire to, that's a lifelong process, you know. So yeah, it has the power to move me probably more than anything else, you know. I'm just thinking again. I was rediscovering Big Star's music. You know the band Big Star from the 70s.
Oh,
Alex Chilton. Yeah. I mean, I was rediscovering their stuff. In particular, that third album, which has different names depending on who you talk to. Some call it Sister Lovers, some call it Third. But that's a great record. Again, deconstructing the sound of it, pulling apart the music so it's completely skeletal almost. But there's a song by them, not on that record, called September Girls. You know the one? It's a really big pop song.
The Bangles covered that, and there's probably a couple of other bands that covered that song.
Yeah, I think they had more of a hit with it than Big Star, which, you know, that's the tragedy of that band. You know, they were not recognised in their time, you know. But that song September Girls has that line, you know, I love you, well, never mind, you know. And if you wrote that on paper, that's quite, you know, there's nothing special. But with the music, the uplift of that music and the combinations of that throwaway phrase, I mean, that's the power that music has. It can take the, you know, the parochial, the mundane, and turn it into something, you know, otherworldly. Again, I'm going to use a quote, but there's one by Plato where he says, music lends charm to sadness, you know, gives flight to the imagination. You know, I can't put it better than that. You know?
No, you can't. When you're writing music and when you're playing live, when you're able to play live, if you do, what motivates you?
Yeah, well, I mean, like everybody, it's not happening so much lately. Well, I mentioned we finished recording an album late last year, and we did a launch for it just before the whole pandemic thing, you know, hit. We had a great time. It was the first time we played live in a while, to be honest. But we were gearing up to sort of start playing again. You know, people had asked us to keep going, and then of course that happened. So that, you know, put a nix on all those plans. But I mean, it's a whole different experience for me, playing live to recording. The recording for me is the part that probably I enjoy most, because it's that thing of crafting the music, discovering what the music is as you're creating it. You know, there's that element of surprise that always happens, which I find really fulfilling, you know, satisfying. Playing live is fantastic, getting the feedback from the audience, building on that and giving it back. You know, it's a whole other experience, which I love, and I wish I were able to do more of. Then, you know, there's the fear of, can you reproduce what you're trying to record? You know, limited number of musicians, all that comes into it. But, you know, it's great fun. You know, you're learning to find the essence of the song, so you're not, you know, expending too much energy on stuff that it doesn't matter. That's part of the art, I think, of playing live, you know, to reach people. But, you know, I wish we were able to do more of it. Is the short answer.
I haven't been to a live show in such a long time, even before stuff happened. But what I have been noticing, listening to music that I'm listening to lately, I recently listened to all the Rolling Stones that I could get my hands on. And,
yeah, I love that stuff.
I've been listening to a lot of freeform jazz, and what I have noticed is that a lot of these jazz artists, albums were released not necessarily as live albums, but they were live in a venue, and they recorded it and they released it. Not every single time they do that one particular song, it's different.
Yeah.
The energy, the spirit, everything is different.
Absolutely. I mean, there are artists that are known for that. You know, you mentioned the Stones. I mean, they're terrific at kind of going with the moment, you know, and it doesn't matter so much if it sounds like the record. You know, on the other hand, you have someone like the Eagles, where they'll reproduce every single note exactly, you know, and the followers of bands like that will expect them to do it exactly like the record. And they can do that, you know, my hat's off to them. I don't think I'd be able to manage that with my music, but, you know, horses for courses. I mean, I love that, like you say, that idea of, you know, letting the music take you somewhere new as it's happening, you know, and in response to whatever energy you get from the audience. That's a whole nother trip, isn't it?
It's a whole other level. What are you working on right now?
Yeah, well, again, we're not really playing live. I mean, I hope we get to record again soon. So working on new songs all the time. Even that, has taken a little bit of a backseat with everything that's been going on. But yeah, I mean, that's where my focus is at the moment. And hopefully within the next year or so, we'll get back in the studio and put stuff down. So that's where we are at the moment.
Now, when I sent you these questions earlier, I don't know if you had a chance to look at them, but do you have any questions that you want to be asked that we haven't asked?
You know what? I always ask, when I'm talking to people about music, I always ask them what their favorite album is, and then I get a pretty good idea of where they're coming from. Although already from our conversation, I've got a good idea where you're coming from. But it's a standard question that I just like to ask people. So I'm going to ask you, if push came to shove, what would be your favorite record?
Of all time?
Again, it might change next week, but just at this moment.
There is this album that is being cleaned right now. That is absolutely mind-blowing, and they released it in 1974, so 7 years after Coltrane's death. That he did with Rashid Ali. It's called Interstellar Space.
Oh wow!
If I have to pick, it's that, or it's because I've been listening to that. I've been listening to a lot of Sun Ra. Right now, I'm with Archie Shepp.
Yeah.
The British jazz is doing things to me.
Yeah, that's right. And it's such a hard thing to kind of put your finger on what it is that makes that music move you. Yeah. But when you hear it. Yeah. Yeah. No. Well, there you go. Again, I wish I knew more about jazz, and you've kind of inspired me to explore it.
I am listening to it. I just started listening to this stuff.
Oh, right. When you say just, what, like in the last year or?
The last 5 years, give or take.
Okay.
Generally from about 8 years ago. My introduction was this Disney tribute album that was released in 1988, 1989 by Hal Willner producing.
Right.
Natalie Merchant is on it, Michael Stipe is on it, Ema Sumac is on it, Ringo Starr and James Taylor are on it, The Replacements are on it, and among others, Tom Waits is on it too. Among others, the Sun Ra Orchestra is on it, doing a cover version of Pink Elephants on Parade from Dumbo.
It's from Dumbo, yeah, I know.
Bizarre and mind-blowing, and I let it. I couldn't stop listening to that CD, so the roommate that I had at the time belonged to him. He bought it for me for Christmas one year when I was still living in California. I couldn't stop listening to it. It took me until 5-6 years ago, give or take. And now I have like 7 or 8 albums, including 2 collections of singles of Sun Ra. Wow. Between Coltrane and Sun Ra and Espen and the Witch, I've been listening to a lot of music that really can't be categorized, and the Sun Ra got me into everything else. And I got into Coltrane, and then I started diving deeper to see who he worked with and who they worked with, and it's just it has blown up.
Yeah, I was going to say Sun Ra he's in his own category, really. I can't think of another artist you would liken that to. His own genre, and that's what's wonderful about that stuff, and like you also mentioned, it depends on which musicians they're working with. You get different, it's like adding different colors to get, combinations that are completely unique, Yeah, I mean, again, I wish I knew more about that stuff, but that's the wonderful thing. You can spend your whole life rediscovering or discovering for the first time music. That would be a really endless journey right there, I think. And I'm perfectly sort of satisfied doing just that, finding music that I'm not familiar with, so that I can have my mind blown all over again.
It keeps me going.
Sorry.
It definitely keeps me going. It keeps me
Yeah,
going.
exactly. Yeah. What else is there really? You know, that's the bottom line. I couldn't agree with you more.